folks, it's Mizpah once more from MMOBuff.TV, and those of you who've been around the block a few times will of course recognise the person sitting next to me. Matt, how you doing?
Really good, really good. It's fun to be here. We're at Pax East at the beautiful Lucky Lounge here.
It's a very different venue, and it's good to be this side of the pond. But as always, you guys are busy, and the last time we had a chat was at your live stream event.
Yeah.
And a lot's gone on since then, so shall we get on with a barrage of questions?
Yeah, give it to me. I'm ready. I'm steeled. I had my beer already, so I'm ready to give you some fast and loose replies.
Lovely. Well, let's start with something that's a little bit topical. Now, we're not going to go into H1Z1 particularly, but there's been some conversation about the size of that world. And that reminds me of a conversation that took place in the past with you guys talking about the size of Planetside and how these continents have been used and have not been used. So that leads me to ask now, really, with the development of the new continent, what are you doing with sizing? Is it now working the way you expect? Are people using the land masses in the way you expect?
Well, we're finding that the size of our continent works pretty well for the number of players in our game because it allows people to spread out and have multiple large frontline fights with our kind of max zone server capacity. I think that one of the interesting things about developing levels for Planetside was we were constantly wondering why Indar was the most popular continent. Why is this one that we kind of would look at and see like the bases are terrible and like the flow here is just bad. Like why is this the one that all the players are at? And I think we eventually came around to the fact that the density of the outposts was the thing that made Indar work really, really well. You could typically see the next base that you were going to go to from the one you were at, so it made a lot of sense the way that kind of navigating through the world worked. That's something we've tried to do better as we've gone through and revamped the other continents too. In some cases like Esamir, our density was very low for outposts. And we did that because we wanted there to be lots of wide open space in between to have these open field fights. But in general, like in a lot of cases, you would have these big armor fights going from one base to another. But then other times you would just see it completely shortcutted. Like squads would just jump into galaxies or jump into sunderers and just completely try to skip all of that stuff in between. So as we've gone through and revamped these continents, what we've been doing is adding more outposts in between, making more kind of flashpoints in between the bases and trying to punctuate a little bit better the spaces between our bases. But in the spaces between our bases, that sounds really cheesy. But the general idea of these 64 square kilometer continents, the gameplay space that they create is pretty good for us. I don't think we would want to go too much bigger. I think it would just be, it would make it possible for people to wander around lost too much, and it would make it harder for us to make sure that you can see the logical progression from this base to the next. And I don't think we really want to make them smaller either, because right now, with the number of players that we typically have in our game at night, you know, a continent when it's reaching a pretty high population feels great. It feels like there's plenty of options for fighting in. You know, there's plenty of fights that you can jump around to. And while we have some smaller maps like Battle Islands and stuff, I think the size of our overall continents is perfect where they're at.
Okay, and we are a month after the Infiltrator update.
Yeah.
Now, you had some stated aims there that you were trying to achieve, particularly in terms of the roles and playstyle of the players, other bits and pieces. Have we hit these aims and goals? What are we seeing in the stats? How's it working out?
So we are seeing that, like, when we do one of these class updates, our kind of template for that is that we want to add a new ability that really gives that class a kind of new approach to the way that they play. And we want to give them a couple new weapons, and we want to fix a whole bunch of quality of life issues that those players are telling us. So like the Infiltrator update, you know, players would say, oh, I hate this, then sometimes the cloak does this, and we did our best to try to fix all the little issues that we could and give players kind of what they wanted. Now some of those things, like players said, oh, we wish we had a straight pull bolt attachment. That's something that we said, okay, cool, we're going to put that on the list, it'll get done with the Infiltrator update. It's taken us a lot longer to get the straight pull bolt attachment done, you know, get it polished, get the animations looking, feeling good. But it was something that we initially tasked in with the Infiltrator update. Now, all of our class updates are kind of going to follow that same idea of new ability, new role, new weapons, and fix as many issues as we can. So since the Infiltrator update, we've definitely seen an increase in the new abilities. So they actually got a couple different new things. They got the Stalker Cloak, which is a completely unique kind of way to play as an Infiltrator. And there are a lot of people who really love that kind of unique aspect of playing as an Infiltrator. I just want to get 10 kills in the exact same room, like completely hidden, no one knows I'm there. The other thing we gave them was a new motion spotter tool. And we're definitely seeing a lot of use of that motion spotter tool as a replacement for the old ranged gun that we had. So that's really cool. And as we progress forward and do more of these updates, it's exciting to think about like the possibilities of what would an engineer get in the next one. And then after that, like what can we go further with? And that's what makes working on a game like Planetside, an MMO game like this that doesn't have an end point, so exciting, right? Is you never have to be like, oh man, I wish that we had done it that way. I wish that we had thought about it then. You know, you constantly have time to go back and revise your decisions and, take input from players and change things based on the reality, not just the theoretics that you've developed it against originally.
How does that approach play into the roadmap? Because obviously we have this schedule. You're saying this is what we're trying to deliver down the line.
Yeah.
Let's say with recent class changes, you might say, hey, this is in a good spot, move on to next on the roadmap. You might say, hey, we're not quite delighted with this yet. Let's go and refine a little bit more.
Yeah.
So where are you at with Infiltrators, and will more changes, if any, come in the near future or later on down the roadmap?
So, I mean, where we're at with Infiltrators now, they'll continue to get changes, but they'll be in the type of like small buffs, small tweaks, small changes, small quality of life additions, not another big concentrated, we're doing a ton for Infiltrators update until their cycle comes around again. So our plan right now is still to layer in class and vehicle updates as we can. Some of those are going to get replaced this year with actually brand new vehicle additions, or maybe even like, we're going to put in a brand new weapon mechanic, like for maybe 1 month. Instead of a class or vehicle update, we could do something like a orbital strike, which is just a brand new change to the way the game's played. We don't really necessarily have plans to do that right now, but that's an example of the kind of things that we could potentially slot in there. So Infiltrator, I wouldn't expect to see, at least in the next year, like a big push for changing Infiltrator specifically. But like we're continuing to do things like make sure that the visibility of the cloak between different settings works, which is something that's annoying to Infiltrators. That straight pull bolt attachment's finally getting into the game now, and we'll fix little, problems and, sticking points that players have with the Infiltrator gameplay as they come along. In terms of roadmap for us is a really, really cool tool because we're still never going to get things exactly right the first time we put them on the live server. We know that we're going to adjust based on data that we collect, based on our own play experiences on live in ways that we couldn't predict beforehand, that we couldn't test out with a couple hundred players on test server. The game really needs to be analyzed in the way that it's played, which is 24/7, hundreds of players, grinding over these spots over and over again. And there's no way that you can adequately do that internally, right? Unlike most other games where you can get the 5 people who worked on this dungeon to run through it together and see, hey, was it fun? Did we get the right loot? Cool, the dungeon's great. Planetside, that shit doesn't work at all, right? You need to seriously have the hundreds of players playing on it to figure out where things break down. Roadmap is a tool that helps us a little bit with predictability. So instead of starting kind of at the ground level of, we on the team think this is a good idea, at least by the time we release it on the live, we know the things that our players think are good and bad about that thing. We've hopefully been able to adjust it based on the feedback that our players have given. And so it's worked out really well in that way for us to make sure that the thing that we're delivering, at least knowing it's never going to be perfect the first time it goes out, we know that it's the thing that players want, they understand, and we've been able to remove some of the things that were really contentious or really, something that players just hated in the system. And we've done that really well, I think, with a lot of the things that we've done. Our implant system is an example of one that we've completely changed based on player feedback, based almost entirely around the roadmap. And we've gone through a couple different iterations on it, and we're basically at the point now where we feel really good about what we're going to release because we've gone through this process with our players enough that, now I think people are comfortable with the system we have. We're comfortable that we're not trying to build something that's like maybe trying to squeeze them for money. It's not something that's going to make people feel like it's pay to win. And that kind of process was only possible because we had the roadmap in place and we had this back and forth two-way communication process. So in that way, it's been absolutely enormously valuable. We're updating it weekly now. We put a change log in there. So every week when we do that, I tweet out the link to it. And if any players who want to can check it out. So if you guys out there care about Planetside at all, I would say go to the roadmap, read it, give feedback. If you want to be literally involved in shaping the future of the game, that's the place to do it. If you have nitpicks, you pissed off about something we did, if you love the game and just want to help move it in a certain direction, you have an idea for something you've always wanted to get out, that's what the roadmap is really for, and your participation in it will directly influence where the game goes.
So player feedback is key, but I'm guessing there's different sorts of feedback. One thing is someone saying, hey, I think this, but I guess you've also got to be collecting data. Perhaps a little bit of insight into the tools you've got behind the scenes that give you information.
We collect such an enormous amount of data about what players are doing in the game that we can at any time slice things in ways that would just astound you. So the first step, whenever we're looking at a problem in the game or wherever we're looking for a problem in the game, is definitely consulting player feedback. So someone will say, hey, this thing's overpowered. And we'll look at it and say, okay, does it feel overpowered? Like, why does it feel overpowered? Because there could be tons and tons of reasons in a game like Planetside why something feels overpowered. For example, like as a Vanu player, you're very, very, I don't know if you're a Vanu player, I was projecting. Okay. So as a Vanu player out there in the world somewhere, you're very rarely getting killed by the stuff that is really like strong on the Vanu side, right? TR players and NC players are getting killed by that stuff left and right. So they're like, oh man, this shit's all OP, and Vanu players are like, what are you talking about? Like, it's perfectly balanced, it's perfectly fine. And that's kind of a unique aspect. So when we get feedback from players, we always have to sort of, look at what they're really saying and try to understand what the underlying issues are, and then we go to the data, and we can really prove it out, right? So it's sort of like a scientific process. We get a hypothesis from the players, right? And then we review the data ourselves, and we experiment on it, and we see, okay, is this going to be better or worse? And we try to make our little tweaks and improvements, get feedback from players, and move forward that way. But we definitely don't go into a meeting thinking, hey, let's look at data and figure out some changes we can make based purely on data. At least, especially when it comes to things like game balance and game design. It's always, the genesis of it always comes from our own or players' feedback about what's working and not working in the game.
Okay, so everything is player-led, yet you use data to actually support or drill down or investigate the statements to go, what's the detail behind this?
Exactly, and measure it too, right? So we know what kind of change we need to make. If this thing's 200% too strong, that's a much different and much more severe problem than it being 20% too strong. 20% too strong in the hands of an expert is going to feel like the most overpowered thing in the world, though, right? So it's very, it's a very fine line, and almost every decision we make has to be case by case. It's not like we can just write procedure for game balance, follow these steps, and the game is balanced, We seriously have to sit down and talk about all the changes. If we're, making a change to a Liberator gun, for instance, it requires some very serious thought. Like, there's a giant chunk of players who like the gun the way it is. Obviously, if it's overpowered, then there's going to be an even gianter chunk of players who like the gun exactly the way it is, right? In a lot of cases, people have spent money on those things. How can we, with as little impact to the actual thing that players like, solve the problem that other players are having? And when we have like a combined arms game like ours with such complex interactions where you can have an airplane 500 meters away that's killing you, and you really didn't have much of a chance to do anything about it or react to it or skillfully avoid it or anything, that's a very frustrating experience for this guy. And if you think about like something like an infantry player, maybe 10% of his deaths are coming from an ESF, right? When you think about 10% of your deaths coming from an airplane flying around, that doesn't seem terrible.
Feels like a lot more.
Right, exactly. But then if you flip that on its side and say, 1 out of 10 times that this dude died, he could do nothing about it. He could react to it no way, and there was nothing he could really feasibly do to prevent himself from being killed except for not be in that place at that time, right? Then it's a much more frustrating situation. Then the solution to that isn't necessarily, oh, well, let's just nerf this ESF. It's how do we give this person a little bit better situational awareness? How do we make it so that this guy can run from building to building a little bit safer if he wants to, so that it's his fault if he got killed by the ESF because he didn't take the route that was a little bit more safe? Now we don't need to nerf rocket pods. We need to just think about solving the issue in a kind of more complex, but hopefully better for the long run of the game way. And that's the thing that we're striving to do, but it's very, very hard. And, a lot of times you end up just saying, is it worth us taking 6 weeks to solve this, or should we just go for the hard nerf and just, make this thing do 50 points less damage? And that's just a matter of balancing your development resources versus the severity of the problems that you have versus your roadmap of features that you want to work on, and kind of playing Tetris with all those little blocks along the way. And it's basically 99% of my job, Tramel's job, when we're not on the road talking to you guys. That's what we do. We hole up in an office somewhere, and we just look at spreadsheets that look like you're playing Breakout almost, It's just like tons and tons of little tiles in there that represent tasks, and you're moving them around and trying to figure out how to make them fit.
Okay, so we've touched on two things there. We've touched on weapons, we've touched on vehicles.
Yeah.
And of course this leads back to something that was said a long time ago, alpha, beta, about customizable slots and bits and pieces on weapons. Where are we at with that on vehicles? Sorry, where are we at with that at the moment?
Well, we have a lot of customizability on vehicles, on infantry characters. Each one of our weapons, with some exceptions, It has customizability that allows you to, make the weapon very role specific for exactly what you want. We're adding more ability for players to do sort of cosmetic customizations to weapons now. The first thing that's going to be coming is we have gels on flashlights. So you'll be able to actually take some of the decals that you can normally put on your shoulder, throw that on a flashlight gel, and now you can project that on the walls and stuff. So that's kind of fun, especially if you're in an outfit and your outfit, everybody, has the rainbow decal, and then, you come to a base and everybody's rocking flashlights or something. So it's kind of just like most cosmetic stuff. It's just a fun way for you to do something that doesn't really affect if the game is balanced correctly or not. It's just some fun cosmetic customization. And we want to expand that to, weapon models potentially in the future. We have our player studio initiative, so players right now can create helmets and camos and stuff. So allowing them in the future to potentially create things like cosmetic variations for weapons is something we've talked about extensively too.
I know there was talk at one point in time about things like the Galaxy Gunship.
Yeah.
How that could be played with. Is there a role for that in Planetside too?
I think we kind of have the Galaxy Gunship going right now, just because that thing has a lot of slots for weapons on it. You get 6 guys in one of those things. They're pretty strong. Now that Galaxies actually can spawn your squad mates on them too, they work really well for close support. I actually find myself getting killed by Bulldog Galaxies more than I'm getting killed by ESFs or Liberators nowadays, because lots of people will just bring a Galaxy and it's a spawn point, and they have really, really good weapons on them. So,
fair enough. We'll have to move on to something else then. The PS4 variant of the game.
Yeah.
It's been talked about. We know it's coming possibly at some point down the line.
Yep.
Where are we at with that today?
Right now, internally, we're working very hard on the PS4 version. We have a separate team from the PC team that's working on doing optimization and UI conversion for the game. So our biggest challenge is we've got all of these MMO screens, very deep customization screens, inventory type screens, that we need to now fit into a console experience and have it be something that's very usable and very easy to interact with. That's a huge challenge. That's probably the biggest, from a design point of view, challenge that we have in getting it onto the PS4. And then we have a ton of engineers that are working on getting the game to be purpose-driven to work exactly on that PS4 hardware and squeeze every single frame per second out of it. That's the main stuff that's going on. And the cool thing about the PS4 project is we still have the entire PC team that's building stuff on the PC game. And when we launch on the PS4, we get all the stuff that the PC team has been working on building too. So while we've been working on things like the mission system and the tutorial and doing all these things to try to smooth out the on-ramping of new players into the game, when we launch on the PS4, we get to take full advantage of all that stuff for that brand new audience too.
And will this always be a segregated audience in the future? Will there be any ability to bring these audiences together?
I mean, there's definitely an ability to do it. We're not doing that. It is completely segregated, but it's more for logistical reasons. There's a lot of sort of business reasons why, but one of the main reasons is just from an update standpoint. Like the PSN, the SCEA, the Sony Computer Entertainment of America, they have their own entire QA process that a game update needs to go through, and sometimes that can take several weeks we didn't want to have to tie our PC update schedule to the rigidity of their update schedule. And they have very good reasons for doing the things that they do and the way that they approve updates. They obviously want every piece of software that goes onto their console to be bulletproof and kick ass, but on the PC side, we want to be able to quickly iterate. We want to be able to continue to do updates and not necessarily have to throttle our updates down to the speed that we're doing on the PS4. So because of that, we can't necessarily have players going back and forth between them, because they're going to be working on different versions of the game from time to time. As much as possible, we're going to try to keep them together. We want the things that we're adding to the game to benefit both ecosystems equally. So we're going to try to keep our game versions as close together as we can, but we know there'll be days, sometimes weeks, that an update won't be shared across both of them. So in those cases, it's just better for us to have it separate.
Okay. And do you imagine then, with this refactoring of sort of the HUD and the interface and everything else, for it to be a purely controller-centric environment, or do you see people using third-party peripherals, keyboards, bits and pieces on PS4 in the future?
I think they can if they want to. We're doing our best to make it so that everything that you want to do in the Planetside 2 works very well on just the default controller. We don't want it to be something where, there are console games sometimes where it's it's required to plug a keyboard in to play this game, like Phantasy Star Online. Some of those other kinds of games, you had to have a keyboard. That was just how it was. we don't want that for Planetside. You know, as a shooter, especially, we have voice over IP in the game. There's really not a reason for you to have a keyboard attached. You can use text chat if you want to, but I expect most people to be using voice over IP. We have things like voice commands too. The PS4 has the ability to, do voice commands to open menus and stuff. So some amount of navigating menus and doing like quick things like selecting loadouts can be done completely by voice commands, and that's pretty exciting. So hopefully we'll be able to support that kind of peripheral, and we want to be able to support a lot of the exciting peripherals that Sony's working on, right? But I don't know if we'll. I don't think we'll have a game that will require any peripheral except for the PS4. Maybe a mic. A mic might be like a fairly required peripheral for the people.
Pretty tricky to communicate without one.
The good news is the PS4 has a mic, the controller has a mic built in, so you don't even need that.
Final one for you then. Mm-hmm. We're at PAX. People are in the vein of announcing things and saying this is all of our new shiny stuff. What should the players be looking forward to in the next 6 months? What are the big ticket items that have you excited?
I think the most exciting thing that we're working on right now, we're working on a brand new continent called Hassan. That's very cool. It's something we've been working on for a long time, so I'm really, 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 really excited to get it out to players finally. That's a big one that'll be coming in the next 6 months, I hope. And we also have a system called Directives, which I'm very excited about. It's our achievement system, essentially, but it also serves as a kind of tutorial system. So as you progress through the directive system, it'll unlock new game concepts for you to learn through achievement. And then once you get past sort of like the tutorial phases of the directive system, it's a very, very deep MMO-style achievement system that can work for players who played thousands and thousands of hours, continually have a goal of a brand new thing that they need to do, a very expert kind of role system. So the entire design for Directives is up on the roadmap, so you can check that out. You can read through it, see how the trees work. It's a very cool design. We're really excited about getting it out there, and that's one of the things that's going to be coming in the next few months that I think is going to be a big game changer for Planetside.
Well, Matt, thank you very much for your time.
Of course.
We are, of course, busy running around at PAX, and it's probably time for this gen to have a break.
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed.
You bet, man, you bet.
This, as always, is Mizpah, signing off for MMOBuff.TV.